Shefa loy sechayeh. This week's parsha, Perek Chav Beis, Pasuk Yud Zayin, in Mishpatim, it says, a sorceress you shall not allow to live. Now, interestingly enough, this pasuk comes right after the following two psukim. If a man will seduce an unmarried virgin woman that was never betrothed, she's not engaged to anybody, and he will lay with her, that he is obliged to marry her, if her father shall surely refuse to give her to him as a wife. And Chazal learned from I think, if I remember correctly, from the double lashon, that she can also refuse, because we know that a woman cannot be married off to someone without her consent, without her interest, without her acceptance. He has to pay a fine for what he did. So, is there a connection between these two things, between this case of seduction, a man effectively taking advantage of a woman? No, he didn't rape her. He seduced her. He got her to comply. He got her to go along with it. Now, that does not mean in every single situation where violent force was not used that it wouldn't be even halachically categorized as rape. There certainly can be cases where there's means of using coercion that are not physical. But yefata means that a man succeeded in getting her to genuinely want it. So that's what we're talking about. Seduction is where someone used whatever tools that he had in his toolkit to get her to actually go along with it. Nevertheless, there is obviously a taking advantage over here. So is there a connection between these two things? Now, obviously, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not arrange psukim in a haphazard, random manner. The question that we're really asking is there something that we are able to understand? Is there something that we can glean and derive from the juxtaposition of this parsha of Pitui, of a man seducing a woman, and this pasuk that talks about not allowing sorcerers to live, that they get the death penalty? So first, let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi, bringing from Chazal, says, Echad zecharim, echad nekevos. It doesn't make a difference whether it's a man or a woman when it comes to this kishuf. Ela shediber hakasuv b'hoive. Just that the pasuk is talking about what's more common. Shehanoshim mitzuyos mechashefos. Back in the day when kishuf was a thing, it was much more common that women would be involved in it than men. So I think that already gives us a clue. Okay, so there's some type of deviant behavior going on, because kishuf, if we understand, it's instead of tamim tiyeh meshalom akecha, instead of going with the quote-unquote natural order of things and going with tmimus and trusting HaKadosh Baruch Hu, trusting in the process, kishuf is a form of trying to manipulate the process. It's an engagement in trying to get what you want through deviant manners. And we're saying, well, women were the one, back in the day, women were the ones that were more often doing that than men. And so that's interesting. That comes right on the foothills of a man taking advantage of a woman. So it turns out that there are mefarshim that point out that this is actually a pattern, that there are multiple times in Tanakh where seduction is put together with kishuf, with sorcery. So there definitely is a direct connection. Now, fascinatingly enough, some of the Mefarshim say that very often when there was trafficking involved, it was a woman sorcerer that would be the middleman, so to speak. She would be the one trafficking the young innocent girls to men that were interested in that. But I was thinking that perhaps there's an insight that we can layer into over here based on a fascinating and highly disturbing conversation that I once had. So the conversation was precipitated by, I noticed one day an advertisement of the organization Yad L'Achim. Now, if you're not familiar, not to be confused with Lev L'Achim, which is a fantastic kiruv organization, Yad L'Achim, I suppose you could call it a type of kiruv in a way. Yad L'Achim, what they do, the two main things that they do, as far as I'm aware of, is number one, they're involved in anti-missionary work. They try to identify where missionaries are operating, where they're giving out materials, etc., and they speak to Rabbanim, they warn the population, etc. That's one area of activity that Yad L'Achim is involved with. And the other area activity, which probably is more well known, but I'm not sure, is that they are very involved in helping Jewish women and girls extricate themselves from relationships with Arabs, in particular if they're already living together with an Arab and having a family with them in Arab villages, and sometimes the operations that they do are like special forces types of operations, really wild stuff. So one day I saw an advertisement, and because of my work in the field of child sexual abuse prevention and awareness raising, there was something that caught my eye. Something about the advertisement was, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was at the very least alluding to the issue of sexual abuse. So I was very curious because, as far as I was aware, this wasn't something, that Yad La'achim deals with. So I reached out to them and promptly forgot about it. And then about 6 months later, I get an email, or maybe it was a phone call. I think it was a phone call, actually. I think I sent them an email, and then I got a phone call 6 months later, and I said, hello? This is from Yad. So I don't remember the woman's name. From the conversation, it became evident that she was someone who clearly knows a lot about what's going on in Yad La'achim. And she says to me, we've been trying to reach you. You reached out to us. And I was racking my mind. I was like, what? I reached out to you? I said, oh, right. Yes. Of course, I remember. I said, you put out this advertisement, whatever. And, it caught my eye because of the work that I do. And she said, okay, so what would you like to know? What did you want to ask us? I said, well, I wanted to know, is sexual abuse something that you're seeing? Is it something that you're coming across? And she said, absolutely, a lot. And I said, okay, so then let me ask the question in a very clear-cut way. What percentage of the women and girls that you are that you're assisting to extricate from relationships with Arabs experienced sexual abuse before they ever began striking up a relationship with an Arab? And she says to me, well, are you asking about overall, or are you asking specific to Haredi women and girls? Sometimes when someone throws something at you and you feel like your head's spinning, catch your chair because you might fall off. And I said to her, Haredi girls? What do you mean by that? You're telling me there are Haredi girls and women that get involved with Arabs? What is that supposed to mean? She said, well, primarily it's women or young women, girls that were Haredi. They grew up in a Haredi home, and today they're not. But we do have some that even today, despite their relationship with an Arab, identify as Haredi. So I kind of caught my breath, and I said, all right, well, let's start with overall. Overall, the women that you are assisting to extricate themselves from these relationships, how many of them had at least one experience of being sexually abused before they ever started to get into a relationship with an Arab in any shape or form? She says to me, at least 90%. Again, I'm going to repeat that. At least 90, tishim. At least 90%. I had to breathe for a few moments. Was not expecting that. I'm going to be honest. Despite everything I knew about her already at that point. And then I said to her, hesitatingly, scared, and Haredi? She says to me, at least 99%. Again, 99, Tishin v'teisha, at least 99%. So again, I took a deep breath, and I said to her, so you're telling me that sexual abuse causes girls to wind up in relationships with Arabs? Not that every single girl, this is so important. Anytime you hear a statistic, that statement that sexual abuse causes girls to wind up in a relationship with Arabs does not mean that the majority of sexual abuse victims will then go try to get into a relationship with an Arab. It doesn't even mean that a significant minority. It means that this phenomenon of girls getting involved with Arabs romantically is caused by sexual abuse. Meaning, there could be 1%. It could be 0.001% of girls that are sexually abused will wind up getting into a romantic relationship with an Arab. The point is that if you're dealing with this particular phenomenon, this particular issue of girls that wind up getting mistabchot, they wind up getting into these often complex and dangerous relationships with Arabs, that if you're looking for the cause of that, sexual abuse is certainly, based on what she told me, those numbers, would at least be one of the major causes. At least. At least. I mean, obviously, this is not a proper epidemiological study, with controlling for variables. But when you're talking about that level of numbers, so I said to her, you're telling me that this is the cause. She said, well, I don't know if you could say that sexual abuse is the cause. This is how she said it to me. Okay, I'm translating from Hebrew. You know what? I'll say it in Hebrew first, and then I will translate it. מה שאנחנו רואים זה שבחורה נהיה לה קשר עם ערבי, זה בגלל שהזהות היהודית נטשטשה אצלה. ואם תשאל אותי, למה זה נטשטשה לזהות היהודית, זה בגלל שמישהו פגע בה. עכשיו, now I'm going to translate. What we see, this is what this woman told me, what we see is that girls that wind up getting into romantic relationships with Arabs, it's because their Jewish identity, their internal sense of Jewish identity has become confused, modeled, messed up, made blurry. It's become blurred. And if you'll ask me what, this is her continuing, if you'll ask me why did her Jewish identity get blurred, it's because someone abused her. As if that wasn't the most painful part of the conversation, here comes possibly, I'm not sure which is the most, but certainly it's right up there. Okay, I'm about to share with you the part of the conversation that might be the most painful part of the conversation. I then said to her, look, you obviously would prefer to prevent these things from happening to begin with, rather than have to deal with putting out the fires, right? Yeah, duh, obviously. I said, so why don't you talk much more about the sexual abuse? Like, why don't you go to the root of the problem? Why are you focusing on the symptom and of the disease and get to the disease itself? She said, we deliberately don't talk about the sexual abuse stuff that much. Now, this conversation was a few years ago, so it's possible that it's changed. I don't know. I'm sharing what happened a few years ago. And in any event, what's relevant is that to get back to understanding what's going on in the parsha over here. So she says to me, we deliberately don't talk much about the sexual abuse part. I say, why? Because it's going to close doors on us. I said, ouch. You're telling me that people just are not willing to hear it. That's right. And I must say that in the course of my work, I've seen that a lot of times. And I'm sure everybody in this space has seen that a lot of times. Sexuality is a tough topic in general. And in particular, when you're talking about sexual abuse, a lot of people have a very hard time making space for it. Which is, I don't know if it's my place to make a judgment. Let's put it this way. It's certainly not helpful. It's not helpful for families. It's not helpful for communities. It's not helpful for our society. If we want to deal with problems, we have to be able to look the monster straight in the eyes and say, okay, I see you. I am scared of you, but I'm not too scared of you to deal with you. It's like one of the things that's come up in the course of my work, particularly when it comes to research. People have this idea, not airing out our dirty laundry out in public, etc. And I've said numerous times that, look, I'm scared of the truth. I'm scared of knowing the truth like anybody else. Like the big question that everybody wants to know is is it worse by us than it is by fill in the blank, whoever you want, secular Jews, non-Jews, whatever. Is it worse by us? That's the biggest fear. Is it worse by, you're not going to tell everybody if it's worse by us, right? And I tell people, I say, look, I'm afraid of knowing the truth just like anybody's afraid of knowing the truth. But you know what I'm more afraid of? Not knowing the truth. I am far more afraid of not knowing the truth than knowing the truth. And I am afraid of knowing the truth. In any event, if you're interested in knowing, the way the conversation ended is that I asked her if she's willing to provide me with those, just a few lines, it was really just a few lines, those numbers that she gave me on an official Yad La'achim stationery. And I told her, I said, I will sign an NDA. I will sign a non-disclosure agreement that I will never show it to anybody else other than if I first get permission from you. Now, that conversation, I didn't sign an NDA. She didn't ask me not to share it. And therefore, I feel that it is within my rights to share it. Maybe some people might argue with me and say, that's not fair. You're not allowed to be sharing this conversation that you had with this woman. But they have plausible deniability. I don't have any proof of it. They can easily deny it if they need to. And to be honest with you, I personally feel that the greater good of our society and society as a whole, but, we focus on our society because that's where we are. So I feel like it's necessary. People need to know this. Now, by the way, I'm going to mention that I shared this conversation with my Rebbe, Rav Aaron Lopiansky Shlita, and he was so nispoil. He said, it's amazing. People think that the reason why the girl went off is because there was a cute Arab guy, hanging around in the makolet, and working there, and he managed to woo her. He managed to seduce her. It's like, it's not that cute Arab young guy that used these sweet talking words to seduce her. It's whoever molested her first that caused it to happen. He was very nispoil from it. But here's what I want to suggest that the Torah is telling us, is that when young women, or women in general, are taken advantage of sexually, it will cause, or will, maybe cause is too strong a word, it will drive at least some of them. Some of them will be driven to deviant behavior because they've been taken advantage of. They have been made, perhaps we could add, they have been made to feel weak, not valued. The Gemara tells a fascinating story. The Gemara says that someone that engages in pairs makes himself susceptible to shadim and kishuf. Now, the Mefarshim over there explain why pairs. Because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is echad. And anything which, once there's more than one, so to some extent, it's as if a contradiction to Einod Milvadoi. So when someone engages in things in a form of pairs, eats a pair of items, he drinks 2 drinks, so it should always be an odd number, not an even number. Now the other Mefarshim explain that we don't do this anymore for various reasons. Okay, I don't know, maybe there are some people nowadays that are makbid on what's called zugais on pairs, but as far as I'm aware, the mainstream opinion is that for different reasons, we're no longer particular about not doing things in pairs. But when in the time that they were, the Gemara tells a fascinating story. That there was a man, if I remember correctly, he was a divorcee. He had been divorced from his wife. And his wife was engaged in kishuf, in sorcery. But she wasn't able to get it to take hold on him because he was always very careful never to do anything in pairs. And one time he went to the tavern, to the inn, and got some drinks. And he was very careful to always to be an odd number. But one day, he drank to the point where he, had so much alcohol in his system that he lost count, and he ended off on an even number. So he ended off with zugais, with pairs. And as a result of that, his ex-wife was able to get the kishuf to take hold of him, to get the sorcery to take effect, and he wound up feeling very sick. He stumbled outside, and he, was grabbing a tree to hold himself up, and he wound up dying, and the tree wound up also drying out and just falling over and dying. So that Gemara might be indicating that women, perhaps women in particular, when they feel like they are being made out to be vulnerable, weak, taken advantage of. The Torah teaches us that women have to be valued, protected, respected, cherished. That's what's supposed to be. And women are inherently, to a certain degree, more vulnerable than men. Physically, they're smaller. They don't have the same response time on average, muscle mass, all these things. Women are, to a certain extent, have vulnerabilities. Not that men don't have any vulnerabilities. So perhaps what the Torah is telling us is that if you don't deal with this first parsha of women not being taken advantage of sexually, then you should expect that at least some of those women are going to wind up engaging in some type of deviant behaviors to compensate for being made to feel less than, for being made to feel disrespected, for being made to feel devalued, for being made to feel weak, vulnerable. And that's why it's not that there's something wrong with women. Oh, why do women do kishuf? It's not something wrong with women. It's something wrong with the people that took advantage of these women. So I think that this is a very, very powerful thing for us to contemplate. Because, I can tell you, and anybody who deals, not only, it's not, I don't deal exclusively in the world of abuse prevention and awareness raising. I'm also dealing with education, and I'm also dealing with marital issues, particularly intimacy, etc., teaching, consulting, etc. And anybody who's in this space long enough, I think, at least from my experience, by all means, you can shoot me an email, rbsa613@gmail.com, and let me know if you have experience that is not in line with what I'm saying. I would love to know. Like I said, I am afraid of knowing the truth, more afraid of not knowing the truth. So again, that's rbsa613@gmail.com. So if you know differently, please tell me. I'm always open to learning more. I want to learn more. But in my experience, everybody dealing in this field sees this type of thing again and again and again. That when in the sexual realm, perhaps in particular, definitely not only, people can be emotionally taken advantage of and neglected and abused. People can be physically taken advantage of and neglected and abused. And it's certainly not our place to compare one type of abusive experience to another, but at least from my experience, it does seem to be that there is a particularly pervasive phenomenon going on with sexual abuse in particular, in terms of the damage that it wreaks, in terms of the long-term fallout, etc., etc. And again, it's not only for the victim. It's for the victim, for the perpetrator. I've had numerous times, this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but once we're here, may as well. I've had numerous times where I've been consulted about situations where it was a brother who was abusing his sister. And each time I tell them, you should reach out to, in America, Child Protective Services, over here, the Misad Revacha, social services, and people freak out, understandably so. I mean, that's an exceedingly terrifying prospect, that you're basically going to massacre your own son to the authorities. But one of the things that I've said over the years, and I still say, is that I want you to, for a moment, pretend that you don't care about your daughter at all. That's obviously ridiculous, but we're doing it. It's to make the point. Pretend you don't care about the victim at all. You only care about the perpetrator. There are many instances where it at least seems, it comes across like that. Like where people talk about sending the girl away. I mean, that is a za'akas hariba oila ad hashamayim. It's like you have a perpetrator and you have a victim, and you're going to send the victim away? What do you think that says to the victim? What do you think it tells the victim? What do you think it makes the girl feel? Oh, I must be the problem because I'm the one being sent away. It's astounding to me that people could even have a havamina. I mean, it's not just a havamina. Unfortunately, people do it. It's astounding to me that, and this is something, by the way, for those that always want there to be a Masar, which is good. This is something that I've heard over and over again from my Rebbe, Rav Aaron Lopiansky. He's dealt with numerous cases as well. And he says it's just horrific. It is such an avla that you send away the victim. But you know what? Let's for a moment pretend you don't care about the victim. It's, of course, people don't care about the victim, but for whatever reason, people, sexuality is a hard topic. They might not feel comfortable with it in themselves, and then all of a sudden there's abuse. It could be system overload, so people are not necessarily thinking clearly. But let's just, for argument's sake, say, okay, you don't care. You only care about the perpetrator. I said, you would be doing the best thing in the world for this boy that you could possibly do by reporting what happened to the appropriate authorities. You know why? Because this type of thing, here, I'll tell you, there's a recording of Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Someone, here, he's got an American accent. It's in Yiddish, but it's very, very simple, straightforward Yiddish. So if you know very, very basic Yiddish, you could understand it. So this man apparently traveled all the way from the States, because he had a very, very thick American accent. Like, it wasn't, his Hebrew was, all right, whatever. It could be that he did live in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know. But he came to Rav Chaim Kanievsky and he said the following. There was a Maisa with an uncle that was Mesachik mit the Ever, that he fondled his nephew's genitalia. And we want to know, should we go to the police? And Reb Chaim answered him, simple logic tells you that by going to the police, you're saving other people. And he says, so we don't need to speak to a Rav or a Bezdin or a Dayan or... By the way, if you want to get a copy of this video, I'm happy to share it with you. It's out there. You could probably find it yourself. But if you'd like me to send you a link for it, again, rbsa613@gmail.com. Happy to share it. So, by the way, let me finish this story first. So he said, we don't have to speak to a Rav first, a Dayan, a Bezdin, nothing. And he said, he repeated it. This was Rav Chaim Kanievsky. This was classic Rav Chaim Kanievsky. He repeated himself word for word. Das ist Matzlan andere. Simple logic tells you that by doing that, by going to the police, you're saving other children. I think he repeated it 3 times. The way the man described the story, the case, sounded like it was a one-time thing. He didn't say this was a repeat offender. He didn't say this was an ongoing thing. He said it sounded like a one-time thing. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky's svara is that someone who does this once, it means that there's something off. And if there's something off, then there's a high likelihood that it's going to happen again. Does it always have to be like that? Obviously not. But is there a high likelihood? Yes. So a boy who, in particular, if it wasn't, let's say, we're not talking about let's say a 14-year-old boy and 12-year-old girl, or let's say 15 and 14, 15, 13, where it's totally, it's totally consensual and they're experimenting and they're exploring, and because they're from, so they're not going to go get a boyfriend and a girlfriend, so it's in a house and this. We're not talking about a case of mutual, consensual, inappropriate sexual exploration. We're talking about a situation where, let's say, a 16-year-old boy is abusing an 11-year-old sister. There's no way, even if he did a yefate, v'chi ishi, seduced her. That is an example of, by the way, one of the halachas is pitui katana oines. Anytime, any katana, no matter what, is always automatically considered rape. No matter how much he seduced her, no matter how much it might seem that she went along with it, etc. So I'm talking about situations where it's clearly an abusive interaction, a really series of interactions. And clearly this boy who's on the cusp of becoming a man, there's something off, because it's not like you're in this together. You're somehow viewing this child, this younger sibling, that really there should be a natural desire to protect and to take care of, and you're using her in a very base way. There's something off, which means that if it's not dealt with properly, the likelihood that one day down the line, you're going to find your son in the slammer for who knows how many years, because at the age of 30, they discover that he's been doing this again and again and again and again, is unfortunately a significant. What exactly the percentages is, you'll have to deal with every case as it is. I don't know if anybody would be able to work that out exactly. There are people that are harachat mesukanut. But if you catch it now, when he's still in his formative years, and you're catching the disease really early, and you get him the help that he needs. So people will say, okay, but I'll get him the help without the authorities being involved. Yeah, but you know what happens, unfortunately, very often? Is that he realizes that it's not serious, and he doesn't want to cooperate, because he doesn't want to look at himself as there's something wrong with him, that he needs tipul, he needs therapy and whatever. How many teenagers, how many adults? And what often happens is that, it just slips between the cracks, and there's no way of enforcing it. Even if a bezdin is involved in many cases, that happens where there's no real way to enforce it. And then what's going to be? The best thing you could possibly do for him. So that's why I said before, the fallout is not only in terms of the victim, it's in terms of the perpetrator, it's in terms of families, it's in terms of communities, it's in terms of institutions, it's in terms of society. So the Torah, I think, is telling us loud and clear. By the way, one more thing I'm going to mention. A recording came out just recently that the current Rav Vosner, who's the Admor of Shevet HaLevi, he's the grandson of the famous Shevet HaLevi, Rav Shmuel HaLevi Vosner. He was recorded recently at a major conference of Chassidish Rabbanim, and he was speaking in, was he speaking in Yiddish? I don't remember. But there's captions in Hebrew. I think he was speaking in Yiddish, but there's captions in Hebrew. This one also, I can send you a link if you'd like. He said that he says there's certain things where if you don't have proper Messiah, if you didn't do Shimush by Rabbanim before you won't know, and you're not going to handle it properly. And he said, when my grandfather it was obvious that he was not going to be in the world probably for much longer. So I decided, he said, I was a Rav at the time in England, and I decided I'm going to travel to Eretz Yisrael because there's a number of psakim, a number of piskei halacha, hayrois, that I was makabel from my grandfather, that to some people might seem surprising, shocking, off, whatever, and I wanted to go to him and make sure that I've got everything right, that I'll be able to tell people without the slightest shadow of a doubt that this is what I was makabel from my grandfather. So what did I do? This is the current Rav Vosner speaking. He said, I wrote them all out. I wrote it out word for word. All of these Hayrais, all of these Piskei Halacha, Hanhagos, etc., that I thought, maybe the day will come that other Rabbanim will say, what are you talking about? How can you say that? And I went to my grandfather, I said, Zaidi, I was makabel all these things from you. I want to make sure that I've got them all right, that I'm not making any mistakes. Could you please go over what I've written and tell me if it's correct or not? Says the current Rav Wosner, my grandfather went over them, and not only did he go over them and approve everyone, he even added a few words on some of them. Then he mentioned the one which is relevant to how to deal with cases of sexual abuse, what his grandfather added. He quoted his grandfather word for word. He said as follows, that my grandfather, Shevet HaLevi, wrote, an avreich like this who abuses should be immediately reported to the police, and it is usher to help him get out of jail until the end of his life. Now, what should be Lamaisa? Speak to a Rav that is knowledgeable about this topic. I'm not here to tell about anybody that based on a recording, even from that type of recording, but it's an important piece of information to know. It's a very important piece of information to know. But of course, when it comes to case, everything needs to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis. You can't make rules that we're just going to apply blindly. You speak with a Rav who is familiar with this topic. He's knowledgeable, experienced, etc. It's interesting. Rav Yehuda Silman, the elder Dayan of the Bezdin in Bnei Brak, his shita is that, Kayadua, there are many Rabbanim that hold that you don't need to speak to a Rav if you have probable cause to think that someone engaged in abuse. There are many, many Rabbanim that say you don't need to speak to a Rav, like Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Rav Chaim Kanievsky obviously held you didn't need to speak to me. Just call the police. And there are many, many Rabbanim that hold that way. And some Rabbanim hold that no, you first have to talk to a Rav. And Rav Solomon holds that you have to talk to a Rav or someone who's expert in this topic. Someone who has a lot of knowledge and he's intelligent, etc. Fine, okay, that's well known. Whether you first need to speak to someone, you don't need to first speak to someone. But to bring it back full circle, I think that there's an unbelievably powerful lesson here. The Torah is telling us you're going to see divergent, deviant behavior. It's, what is this? Kadosh Baruch Hu, talking to you, why are you trying to go against the natural order of the world? You're trying to manipulate things, hurt people, whatever. And you're going to have a tendency to focus in on that outer symptom. No. Look back at Pasuk or two if you want to know what the real cause is. Straighten that up, and then you'll straighten everything else up. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Thanks for listening. If you feel like you get benefit from these classes, from this material, please click the follow button, the like button, the bell button, etc. Share it with friends and family. Once again, thank you for listening.